Alright, greetings YouTubes, fellow military radio enthusiasts. Today we're making a video on the installed equipment on the GRC-142 Teletype shelter. I was requested to make some more content, and specifically a gentleman, I believe from Italy, is trying to restore a GRC-142 Teletype shelter and wanted some more detailed information on the equipment, so hopefully this will help. This is the outside data plate on my shelter, and this particular shelter is an S318. The more common one is the S250. This S318 is about 12 inches shorter on the inside and of course the outside, but the overall length of it is shorter. I believe they were designed to fit in the earlier M37 military vehicles, so it's a little bit shorter. I previously owned the same shelter, the S250, and it did have a little more room inside, which was nice, but really when you're sitting at the chair, it really doesn't make any difference. It's the same when you're sitting at the chair. So, but anyway, or if you had a lot of the newer trucks have the short bed, so having an S318, and if you wanted to put it on a commercial vehicle, probably the S318 would be just the ticket. So anyway, we'll walk in. I don't do any editing or have any fancy video equipment. This is just an old digital camera I have using the video mode, so I apologize. Probably the lighting's terrible, but we'll do the best we can. We'll start walking in right here on the right hand side, and the Teletype shelter will either run off 120 volts AC or 24 volts DC. It's set up to run both. I prefer 120 volts. I've never run one on 24 DC, but it is possible. It's set up that way. I just prefer the 120. That way you don't have to leave your truck running, and you can just set up a nice, quiet, modern generator. I use a Predator 3500, and the shelter really only draws about 16 amps, 17 maybe, in full transmit mode on Teletype. As long as you're not running a heater or something like that, it works just fine. So anyway, the first item you're going to see on the right, we're just going to go over the major components that should be in the shelter. This is the electric AC heater, and let's see if we can get a picture of the data plate. Electric space heater, 115 volt, 1500 watts. So that just mounts with some quick quarter turn screws. And then on the top, there's your thermostat, just a dial, and your on and off switch. Get heat, fan, or off, so you can run it just as a fan. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but maybe to circulate some air. And then next you're going to see this cable terminal strip. If you were running a full duplex GRC-122 shelter, that's where you tie in your second Teletype, and over here on the top of the cabinet you can see the holes. That's where your second Teletype would bolt. And then next thing you're going to see is this thermostat. This thermostat is for use with the fuel heater, and we'll get to that on the other side of the shelter, but this is for the diesel or gasoline fired heater. That's the thermostat for that. And then you're going to have a shelter drawing. This is the electrical drawing of the shelter. It's going to show you where all the wiring goes and the components that are in it. Above that you're going to have your light, a 28 volt DC outlet, and then 415 volt outlets. And here you've got a caution decal about starting the engine if you use a truck to run the shelter for your 24 volts. Then we'll go over here. This is your power and signal entrance box. This is where all the power, DC, AC, and also this is where the field telephones and all that patch in. And there's an entrance on the outside where you can hook in your phones, power. I'll show that, but I mean, this really shouldn't be missing. If your shelter's missing this and that, you're really going to have a tough time, because that would be difficult to replace, I would think. It'd be a lot of wiring. More warning decals. And this is your exhaust blower. This exhausts air out of the shelter. And then going down, this is the J2728. This is a dummy box. There's security or digital encryption equipment that can go here. But of course, that the government doesn't sell that encryption equipment. It's all destroyed or demilled. But the military also provided this dummy box. It's basically just a pass-through to allow you to operate the equipment without the security device in place. So if you don't have the security equipment, you just install this dummy box. It just screws right to where the security equipment would go. Below that, this is your AC/DC distribution breaker panel. This particular one is the SB3538. There are 2 or 3, probably 3 versions that I'm aware of. This is probably the most common one. Sometimes it'll have a guard over the face of it. This one does not. It may be missing or never had it. And there is a newer version of this that I'm aware of. It's same function, just a different layout. And this meter showing 120 volts AC. And this is your power bar here. Flip to the right is AC, and if you flip it to the left, you'd be on DC power. And it has the switches for your inverters, AC main, power supply, receptacles, blowers and lights, and your vent blower. Below that is your main DC power supply. This is the PP4763A. There is a plain version, just a 4763, but this is the updated one. And this is a 50 amp, 24 volt power supply. It takes the AC and changes it to DC. And usually the shelter, probably 25 to 30 amps when everything's running. So plenty of extra capacity there on that power supply. And it weighs 125 pounds. That sucker is heavy, and it jammed in there, and it is no fun trying to get that in there, let me tell you. And then there's all the wires on the back of it, trying to reach those to try and hook all that up. Yeah, it's really lots of fun. Then below that, you're going to have a TA312 field telephone. There's actually 2 of these in the shelters. There's one mounted here, and there's one in the storage cabinet, so you can remote the shelter approximately 2 miles away. You can remote operate your teletypes, or just use the phone to talk on. Then in the center is going to be your main teletype. This is the UGC-74B. The earlier ones had a mechanical teletype, usually gray, a bit taller, and probably not quite as, doesn't stick out quite as far. And those were fully mechanical. This is what they call a terminal unit, communications terminal. They don't call it a teletype, but it really is. And these would have been what would have been probably in the shelters until they discontinued these in the early 90s. In the early 90s, the government got rid of all of them. And most of them had this 74B. There is a 74A, a B, and a C. I've never seen a C. but I'm sure they are out there somewhere. And the A models were problematic, so 99% of them were sent back and rebuilt into this B configuration. Above that, this is your Teletype modem, the MD522. This particular one is the MD522A. You can tell it's the A version because it has this door to the left, and when you open the door, you have squelch and auto mark, hold on and off. You receive, reverse, and normal, and your DC loop 1 and 2, either 20 or 60 milliamp, and then you have the scope intensity, the brightness of your scope. And the layout on the plain model, the 522, as far as the rest of it goes, is pretty much the same. The wiring would hook up the same, but it's nice having the 522A. If you have one of these modems and this meter is missing, these are nearly impossible to find. It took me over a year and a half to find a meter. The government pulled a lot of these meters because they had luminous dials that had radioactive paint on them, so the government pulled all the meters. The good news is you do not need this meter for the modem to work. It'll work perfectly fine without it. You're just going to have to be a little more savvy with your tuning the receive signal. You don't want too much signal, but you want just enough to have clear copy. But anyway, don't worry, if you're missing the meter, you can run it without it. Above that is another blower, and that goes through this hose, and that goes to the top of your GRC-142 radio, and that's going to push air across the amplifier, and that's going to come out an exhaust vent on the outside of the shelter. And that brings us to the GRC-106 receiver transmitter. The actual receiver transmitter exciter is on the bottom, and that'll either be the RT662 or the RT834. This particular one's an RT834, and you can tell by the extra dial on the end that it's an 834. The later one, the earlier ones, only had 5 dials. And then on the top you have your AM3349, that's your amplifier for the radio. And there's different versions of it. Some will have a place in here to put a tuning chart. This one, the chart is at the top, and some will even have a chart at the top and a chart mounted here for tuning. And this is the cable that comes in for the shelter mounted antenna. You can also use a 50 ohm. And then below the radio, tucked up in here in the corner, is your LS166 speaker. That's for the radio and the modem. And below that you have another J2728 dummy box. Next to that you have your GRA6 remote. That's so you can remote the shelter up to 2 miles away. And then below that you have another LS166, and that would be if you have your a duplex shelter, a GRC-122. That would be the speaker for the auxiliary exciter receiver. And if you had a spare exciter receiver, that would mount here on top of your modem. And then below that at the bottom, I know it's difficult to see, but there's a motor generator here. That takes your DC, spins that motor, and when the motor's spinning, it makes AC for your AC items. And there's 2 of those. There's one there, and there's one mounted behind the field phone. The newer shelters had a fully solid state inverter, a DC to AC inverter. These are the older style motor generators. I've never tried them. I assume they work, but I don't know. And then back down on the left side, tucked down there, you've got a wire rack for storage paper, for rolls of paper, and paper tape for the other teletype. And here is your secondary teletype. This is the TT76. I believe this one's a TT76 C model. And the TT76, they call it a, let's see, what do we call it here? Reperforator Transmitter Teletypewriter TT76. And this allows you to pre-punch tapes, this 7/8 wide tape. And as you type, you'll see that it also, it'll focus here. It also prints the letters and numbers here on the bottom, and it also punches holes. Each hole represents, or each series of holes represents either a number or a letter. And you can run it through this reperforator reader here. And then you just feed, once you start it, it'll pull the tape through and it will send a message that you pre-typed. But you can also receive and transmit normal teletype on this machine and use it like a normal teletype, or you can pre-tape, pre-punch messages to send later. It's all mechanical, and these can be difficult to find. I had to search quite a while on my other shelter to find one. I'm in Maine, and I finally found one out in California, and he wouldn't ship it, and I found somebody that lived near him that did ship it. So yeah, hopefully if you're restoring one, you can find one of these, and then getting it to work, it's quite something. They require lubrication, maintenance. There's lots of little tiny springs and electromagnets. Yep. Anyway, this one works nice, so I feel blessed that I have a nice working one. Above that teletype, you've got a holder there for your headset. There's your clock. There's a couple different versions of the clock. This one uses a AA battery. There's also another version that uses a 9-volt battery. And the 9-volt battery actually does not run the clock, but it runs a winding mechanism that winds the clock. I've had those in the past, and you can hear the clock winding, and then it'll run for quite a long time on each wind. But this one that uses the AA battery, they're very accurate, and this battery has lasted, it's been over a year now. And these clocks can be hard to find because they're easily removed, and people like to take them home with them. And above that, you've got another wire rack to put papers in. Then to the upper left here, you have your ME165G. That is your SWR and power meter. You've got power, SWR, and operate. This allows you to check your SWR. You can check the power you're putting out on your radio. These are fairly easy to find. It's a nice SWR power meter, very reliable. Then below that, some more warning decals for the heater. And then below here, you have your heater. When I was assembling my previous shelter, this took me the longest to find. For some reason, these diesel gasoline-fired heaters, they just don't seem to be around. I don't know what happened to all of them. This one appears to be unused. I've never tried to use it. Like I said, I don't use the shelter in cold weather. I've been here in my basement in the off season, so I've never fired it up. But there's a fuel line that goes to the outside, and that goes over by your fuel can holder. And yeah, these can be difficult to find. Then below that, another warning label for your fire extinguisher. 2 3/4 pound. These are actually a halon fire extinguisher, and they determined that that was bad for the ozone, for the environment. It's an ozone depleting chemical, so they did away with it, and the newer ones are called halotron. It's supposed to be environmentally friendly. The last thing you want to do is discharge a dry chemical fire extinguisher in here, because it would make a huge mess. I can't even imagine trying to clean up after that. So they got these halotron, and it's some kind of a gas that extinguishes the fire. It doesn't make any mess, and it's not harmful to electronics. So if you do buy a fire extinguisher, I'd highly recommend getting one of the new halotrons. Even though they're quite expensive, you could buy one probably on eBay a lot cheaper. And then under that, you're going to have, there's a bracket that mounts your boarding ladder, a boarding ladder for your vehicle. And then on the opposite side at the very bottom, you're going to have footman loops and various brackets for your sledgehammer, for ground rods, flags, additional cabling, antenna masts, all that stuff can mount here at the bottom on the other side. The antenna masts are quite bulky and take up a lot of space, and honestly I don't use them. I just use the antenna on the shelter, so I don't have them in here at this time. And then there's cabinet space on either side, and these great cabinets, and these are all your little small accessories go. There's an extra field phone and various other equipment manuals, extra light bulbs, that sort of thing, spares go in these cabinets. Underneath the Teletype there's a little drawer that takes the chaff from these punches. When the machine punches these out, these little dots, it actually goes into a little bin that you can empty, so it catches them in a little tray. So that's the basic overview of the interior equipment of the GRC-142 shelter. This is pretty much all the basic items. Of course, you don't need the heaters to run it, but you're going to need the radio, the modem, a teletype. You don't have to have both teletypes, but it is nice. You can test each teletype. When you type on one, it's going to print it out on the other, so that will show you that each one is working, so that's nice to have. And you're going to need some kind of power supply. You don't have to have this power supply, but you're going to need something that, you know, probably a 40 amp. You could put a newer style 40 amp switching power supply. But yeah, that's the hopefully that helps. And the individual there in Italy, hopefully he can get his shelter up and running. And then I guess the last item I forgot was this chair. It looks like an old school office chair, but at the bottom it has a clamp that clamps the chair down to this channel in the bottom of the shelter, so it can't move. There's a couple versions of this chair. I think this is the earlier one. The later ones, or some of them, even have a seat belt on there, so I guess you could operate it while the truck's moving. And these chairs are probably one of the other things that would be very difficult to find. I've looked for them before and have not been able to find any. In the 90s, scrap metal, early 2000s scrap metal was extremely high, and a lot of these shelters were scrapped for the aluminum. And a lot of people stripped them out and used them for storage buildings or campers or whatever, so it's getting harder and harder to find the items that go inside. So with that, we'll say 73. I hope you enjoyed the video. Any questions, comments? And I apologize again for my crappy equipment, but at present, this is the best I can do. So thank you for watching, and we'll try and post some more content on some other military radios and vehicles that we have here in inventory. Thank you.